had many women approach me in university. None were Black. Presumably, it would have been different if I were a drug dealer. Okay, I wanna touch upon that. Thank you for that comment. Just thank you for that comment, first off. So, because you hit on something. So, for example, my husband's an engineer, right? And he has a lot of friends of his a lot of Black male friends who are in that space. And I remember we have countless conversations with some of these different men in particular who have been like, hey, when I was in college, it was white women who were approaching me, or it was Chinese women who were approaching me. And there were certain Black women that I wanted to date, or I wanted to, and they were dating the guys who weren't even in college. Like, there's certain colleges in particular that may be like in the inner city or urban areas. So they're like, yeah, some of these really beautiful women that we may have been interested in, some of these beautiful Black women we were interested in, they weren't even dating college guys. Some of them were dating like, hustlers. They were dating men who weren't even, and it wasn't like, oh, they had graduated college. It was like they weren't even in the position to be seeking a degree. If you understand what I'm saying. Like, they were basically dating dudes from the street. Those really pretty women, when some of them were dating dudes from the street, they were not interested in us. The ones who were interested in us were primarily non-Black women. I've heard this from professional college educated men who were just like, while I was in the university, I wasn't getting approached. If I was getting approached, it was from non-Black women. And then when I would approach Black women, they were not giving me the time of day because they were with men who were not even in college. Now, I can't say that this is everybody's experience, but I wanted to touch upon that because this is not the first time I've heard this. And I just wonder how many men out there have actually had that experience. And if you've had that experience where it's like, hey, you're putting yourself out there, but women who are showing you interest consistently time and time again, yeah, maybe they don't share your ethnicity, but they're showing that they are really interested. It's like, yeah, you were going to go with somebody who's actually shown and demonstrated that you to them are seen as valuable. So I do appreciate you touching upon that, because I think that's that does happen. That does happen.
I wanted to address the super chat that you just had from Henry.
Okay.
About how he said, because I'm also an engineer too, right? I was part of NSB, part of the executive board at my college.
Sweet.
Went on and got advanced degrees. And NSB is National Society of Black Engineers, right? Yes.
No, I'm familiar with that from my husband also.
Yeah. Well, just I imagine you were, but for anybody who's not familiar. But that comment by Henry was interesting because. And there was another comment by Marco that had some elements of that anti-Blackness that I just don't like. And, it's been my experience that when I was in college, some of the more, I guess, licentious or sexually active women were the white girls. Like, they were really, giving it up a lot more in my personal experience. And maybe there's something there culturally why a Black woman wasn't approaching him, because in my experience I had to approach typically approach to make sure that oops, I'm sorry, did that come through?
No worries.
Oh, am I coming in clear? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh yeah, it was just my personal experience that I had to, be the one to initiate that initial approach. So maybe it wasn't so much that the Black girls at his college didn't find value in him as I think it was an engineer or something like that. Maybe there's just a cultural disconnect there. It looks like he gave his super chat in pounds, so maybe that's different across the pond. But in my experience, it's typically the white girls that would definitely approach you and they're curious about what does it look like and all that stupid stuff in college. So I just want to kind of address that that maybe it wasn't because black women just have this terrible value system that we try to perpetuate a lot, which some of that's true, but a lot of that is not true in my experience.
I hear you. Now, here's one thing I wonder about too, because sexual access is a lot different than marriage, and you have, for example, I have a friend of mine. She's Chinese, and her parents are from China. So she's, I think, like first generation. And I remember her and I have had conversations about her trying to find a husband. And she would tell me, she's like, look, my mom told me that, if I brought home certain people, certain ethnicities, I would lose my inheritance. And so I remember her and I were having a conversation because she was, at the time considering dating a black man, and she considered dating different ethnicities. And she was like, man, like, I don't see the things like my mom does, but also like if I make certain decisions, I could be out of a lot of resources and help. And that's like a real thing. And so, the reason I say that is because I think there's certain people out there, men and women, who, while they might entertain maybe just for their own fantasy reasons or for their own personal, exotic reasons or whatever, they'll entertain other races. When it comes to actually marrying, settling down, especially if they have cultural pressure, they may not be willing to make that step. And so, going to your point earlier, or maybe to his point earlier, I wonder how much of that weighs into it. How much of it is it just women wanting to kind of explore it and try something that's forbidden? Yes. When it comes to marrying, they're still going to marry what their mom and their dad are okay with. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I experienced a similar thing. There was some type of an Asian or Indian fraternity at my college, and one of the things that the girls that would go to that frat, they were in the frat, but they were like girlfriends or whatever of guys in that frat, they would cheat on their boyfriends with black guys. Yeah. But they would never bring their bring those guys home.
Right. And exactly.
And I know what that looks like. I know what that feels like. Unfortunately, not proud of it, but it's this fairy tale that some people tell themselves that these other groups just have a better value system. But if you actually go a couple layers deep, like you're explaining, and tap into that family, tap into that culture, it might not be the case. So
I was watching and listening to your stream, and I gotta be honest with you, from my personal experience, yes, non-black women do approach black men.
Okay.
At a higher rate than black women, period. I mean, when I was in college, I had, white, Hispanic, Asian, even Arabic women all showing me attention. And literally no black women at all even bothered to look my direction.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I mean, it's not even a joke. It was literally no attention. And just like your previous caller said, yes, some of them had the fantasy, but from my experience, most were willing to not only talk to me, but they were willing to take me home. I mean, I even had an Italian girl literally look at me and take me home, introduce me to her parents, and literally said to them, "This is the guy I'm seeing." So I can definitely agree with what Henry said earlier, and from what I've seen, I'm not the only black guy who has experienced that. I mean, my brother and I are both married to non-black women.
Okay, so you're saying in your experience, non-black women gave you more attention and more, I guess, whether you want to call it feminine energy, feminine companionship.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Completely. And don't get me wrong. I mean, listen, I completely and utterly tried to talk to black women. Completely. But they shot me down at every turn. Usually they were going for, that one hood dude, who had all the quote unquote swagger, all the quote unquote street cred. And usually they were all, and no joke, half of them were pregnant before its junior year. I'm not even joking with you. So that experience is absolutely true. Absolutely true.
And this is what I think, I mentioned earlier, because so often when we're having these conversations, it's so easy to just come to to just like really try to simplify things and just say, oh, well, all Black women don't like Black men, or all Black men don't like Black women. You know what I mean? And just make these really general, sweeping statements. And it's so much more nuanced than that. And, I have to wonder how many men in particular shared your experience of being like, hey, it's not like that I didn't like Black women, or I didn't want to date them, or wasn't interested. I got the most consistent positive reaction from non-Black women who were willing to pursue me and work with me. And,
absolutely.
And I just wonder, again, how many men, if they find themselves in an interracial relationship or interracial marriage for that matter, it's not because they were just hating, it's because, okay, this is their experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, like, I actually knew several Black men from several, Black fraternities, and I can say here and now, they all tried. The vast majority of them did marry out, but they all tried to get with Black women first, and they were all shot down. Every single one.
So I'm curious now. Do you know any Black men who were just like, I just don't like Black women. I don't like the way they look. I don't like their hair. I prefer lighter skin, or I prefer this body type. Like, do you know of any Black men who were just like, yes, I don't like the way Black women look?
Yes, I mean, I do know a couple who, okay, they don't like dark skin. They don't like, how maybe their hair, but the vast majority who don't like them now don't like them purely because of the attitude. And then one thing that I've also noticed is that a lot of these women will then turn around when, let's just say hypothetically, an interracial relationship doesn't work. They'll turn around and they will use that as an excuse to bash that Black man further. They'll take it and look at it and say, you tried to essentially get away from us, but it didn't work out there either. It must be you. When they don't know the particulars of that, situation. It could be, for instance, for my first relationship, the Korean woman that I was talking to actually had to relocate. But I never got flack. I never stopped getting flack from it, because many of these women were like, oh, well, listen, it didn't work for you, so clearly the problem is you, And if they were to maybe step out and get with a white guy or a Hispanic guy or an Asian guy, Arabic guy, they would throw that in our faces to the nth degree. And it was like, why are you doing this? I'm not trying to compete with you, but you're definitely trying to compete with me. And it just made them unapproachable. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I wanted to, believe me, but I couldn't do it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experience, because I'll be honest. I'll just be completely honest. When I first started dating my husband, I remember us having this conversation, and I think I had alluded to the fact of like, man, like, it seems like out here, a lot of Black men are interested in Black women. I remember making that statement. And, he kind of checked me, and he was like, well, how many Black women aren't interested in Black men? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I wasn't want to hear it. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not an issue. They got all these options and they're choosing Becky. Like, I was kind of more in the mindset of just like, these Black men, they're not interested. And that was partially informed by my experience, right? Like, I had a different situation or so where a Black man was like, yeah, you're attractive, but I just can't date you because you're Black. Like, I've had too many bad experiences. So I had my own little anecdotal reasons as to why, but I never really had heard the other side. And so it wasn't when I started to hear the other side of things where I was like, oh, dang. I guess, I've just heard from women who maybe have felt rejected, or maybe women who had felt like, they weren't getting love and respect or whatever, or they weren't getting attention, but I had never really heard the men who would share the same experience. And I started to realize, hey, I think this is a little bit more nuanced. And I think maybe we're coming to conclusions that actually really aren't real. Maybe it's not like, oh, all these men are this and all these women are that. Maybe it really is that on both sides, maybe there's a lack of understanding, or on both sides there's been rejection. And instead of you saying, oh, well, it's just all these people, or, well, oh, it's all their fault. It's like, maybe that's the time to do some self-introspection. So I don't know. Like I said, that was just my personal experience here.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Just giving my 2 cents. You touched on something that was really important in regards to, we've been made for all these years to why men date out, why men are, the Beckys and all this stuff. And we've all, even men, we've all like, the man is weak and, he's just dating her so he can just take control and control her, or he's married big Beckys and stuff like that. And nobody ever asked the men. Nobody ever asked the men themselves, hey, and if they do say why they do, it's all BS. You're lying. That's not why. And the real thing I think divestors have a problem with, and other women who don't like, they don't want to answer the why. The real why. Not the stereotypical why, but the real why. Like, we can say, yes, majority of black men, but there is a trend. There is a rise of black men dating out and marrying out. We're even seeing that men, college-educated black men are actually marrying out more than college-educated black women by double. And it's like, okay, there used to be a trope where, okay, the low-value guys are getting the Beckys. But now the educated ones are getting them. The educated ones are going. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. And that's where, like I said, I pulled the latest data on this that I could. I know some of the studies and things, it takes time for trends to really be studied and analyzed. And so I'll be curious 10 years from now to see how the marriage rate changes, just all across the board. Because I'm sure it will, and especially for younger generations, where some of these things, are not being addressed, and some of these ideologies are just being passed down without there being any challenge to it. I think we are going to see some just go into self-hatred, and we might see some where they're just like, I'm not even bothered. I don't even want to fight this battle. I'm going to go over here.
Yeah. Well, I think we're seeing that anyway, where I think the real thing is that, because I'm a nurse and I work with plenty of April Masons, trust me.
Okay.
And
do you mean they have the look and the aesthetic, but maybe their mentality?
Yeah, the look, the attitude. The older women, the educated, sophisticated, but single as French toast, as Kevin Samuelson said. Okay. And I've seen it, for the past 4 or 5 years being in the healthcare field. So, and then they'll complain about men all the time, but that's a whole nother thing. So I would say that from my experience, the real reality is that, and it's a harsh truth, unfortunately, that there's a large collective of black women that just don't want us to submit to any man, or be under the leadership of any man. That's the real truth. All this other stuff about they go into the Beckys, there's a portion of them in jail. There's down low ones. There's all this, because if you put the right guy that matches all the criteria in front of him, I guarantee you he ain't gonna marry him. So so it's easy for me to sit here and be like, I can't find a wife because there's a bunch of baby mamas out there, and hood rats and all this stuff, and OnlyFans. Like, I could easily just sit here and just make that excuse.
Yeah.
And there's truth to what they're saying, but if you go down them directly, specifically, if I ask Cynthia G, go down, let's follow your dating relationship history, and I guarantee you it's a whole bunch of mess. They ain't got nothing to do with the majority of black men. And what they do is they get global. They go globalism. They go everything but them. What everybody else is doing but them. If you go with the specific, okay, I get what's going on with everybody else, but let's talk about you. So it's a lot of not inner reflection, but a lot of outer reflection of what everybody else is doing. You ain't never been through domestic abuse with any black man. You never even dated a black man, but you got all this smoke for black men at 22 years old.
Yeah, well, at that point, it's passed on.
And they have followers who are older than them, and yes, girl, and all this stuff. I'm like, really?
Right. Well,
I'm talking about a particular person too.
Sorry?
I'm talking about a particular YouTuber, but yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's like.
Yeah, and again, that's what I'm saying. When you start to see young people who don't even have the experience promoting some of these ideas, then it's not really coming from them. At that point, this is something that's being passed down. And that's why I'm like, no, I think it's good to have these conversations and actually try to look at what is truly going on. Because if we just, I think, believe propaganda or just blow things out of proportion or just blatantly believe lies, then we're actually not addressing the real issue. We're not really getting to what is truly going on here. So
and this is, and then one last point is that there used to be, and I thought it was always the case. Okay, these are coming from ideas from women who are in fatherless homes, dad's not there, so they have a certain perception of men. No, we're starting to see women, period, in nuclear families with black mom and dad. Dad's a hard worker, and they still got these ideas about black men at 20-something years old. It's like, wait a minute. You ain't never missed a meal, had a good father, and you still got the perception of black men as a whole?
Yeah.
Well, my dad is different, and he gotta be like my daddy. Other than that, if he ain't like him, he falls in line with everybody else, all the other black men. So it's like, why should we? And just one more last thing, and this is something I'm kind of looking at. What I feel was that, I don't know when it happened, but at some point, this is a guy I'm studying, the social contract changed between black men and black women, where black men were, providers and leaders of the community, or protectors of the community, of their family. And then women were, domestic wives. Maybe they had another job somewhere, watched the kids. But at some point, things got added. Like, okay, now you gotta something got added as far as the weight. Okay, our weight's going up. Okay, we may marry you, we may not. We may stay in it, we may not. We're not going to be as submissive or submissive at all. Cooking may or may not happen. You might be cooking. Not that that's an issue. Cleaning, whatever, you need to be complete provider for me to even respect you. You got to out-earn me. And then, so they changed their contract as far as black women, not as a whole, but majority of them, the contract changed. And then we started getting less in ours. So what are we getting when they're adding more stuff that we have to basically deal with? But what are we getting out of it is what I want to know. If that makes any sense. I'm still trying to understand the idea of the guy who was talking about this.
Yeah, I understand. This is like a common complaint I've heard among the manosphere, period. Because I know the manosphere is really multi-ethnic. And it's this idea of really looking at feminism and the way that it has negatively impacted, what we consider gender roles and even marriage just across the board, and how now it seems as if there's a dynamic where women are allowed to be modern and traditional depending upon what suits them best, or mix the two, while men are pretty much required to be traditional, period, and don't have really the option for any other way. So this is a common complaint I've heard just really across the board. So yes, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it is complicated out there to a certain extent. And I don't think it's necessarily fair. It's not really fair for, if a woman wants to have certain liberties to do certain things, but then it's not also, a man isn't also required to have the same liberties. Like, I mean, if we really want to be equal,
he gets shamed for the liberties that he wants to at least address or something. Well, can I date out? No, and if you do, we're gonna shame for it.
Yeah. So,
can I have a weight requirement? No, you can't have that. How dare you? Yeah. So,
right.
But yeah.
Well, I do appreciate you calling in and sharing your perspective.
No problem. I'll send you a super chat. Definitely enjoyed it.
Always good. Okay. You have a good one.
You too.
Yeah. So hey there.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. just hats off to you again for this show. It's a really good one, and I'm definitely interested in that show about why the marriage rates are declining, and I think you're going to do a show around the effects of the environment and the economy as possible reasons why. So I'm looking forward to hearing that. I wanted to put a couple perspectives out there because I've had the fortune of living in like several parts of the country, and so I'd like to throw in like geography as a factor. Like where you where you are. I found that when I lived in the Pacific Northwest, more non-Black women were available, and so that's what the Black men dated. When I lived in the Southeast, I dated more Black women, and now I'm back in the Northeast, New York, and so it's kind of like a mixed bag. But at the end of the day, what I see, Black men and Black women are trying to figure out how to gravitate towards each other. I think that there are a lot of challenges that we face, some of them historical, cultural, systemic, but we are marrying each other. There's a minority that's being magnified. There's a spotlight on this minority, but that's not what reflects like our average day-to-day life. Would you agree with that? I mean, I don't know what you're seeing, but I'm seeing Black men, Black women. I got uncles. My father was married for over 35 years. Uncles married 40 years. That's what I saw. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing Black men, Black women, thick and thin. We're trying to figure it out. So all of this mass exodus of like Black men and Black women divesting, I just don't see that.
Right. Well, and I think you hit on some good points. As long, and we can argue as to the level at which it exists and whether or not it exists or not. But as long as there is a level of racist ideology within America that exists, I think you're always going to have the numbers be stunted. Because you can't really get around that, and you have, not that I want to get too go too much in a tangent, but I mean, we still know that there are pretty radicalized, racialized groups out there that are growing, especially under this economic, the economic challenges we have. So it's like, as long as that exists, I think interracial marriage to a certain extent is always going to be stunted. Also, I think it was a few days ago where I heard this in Twitter in particular. They're saying in Twitter in particular, I think it's either about 10%. It's about 10% of profiles who make up 80% of the tweets. So that is a really, really small amount of people who are incredibly vocal, who are really controlling and driving the messaging. And so again, what do they say? The hit dog hollers, right? It's like it's the unhappy person, the angry person that tends to be the loudest. Even when you think about, when we have a good experience at a restaurant versus a bad one, the bad one is the one that we tend to focus on. And so I do believe that just the way these platforms work, that we tend to hear maybe more negative, or maybe more I don't know if you say negative people, or just negative ideas being spewed and being supported because of that vocal minority. But I don't think that what we see in social media is reflective of how people are living. If we just even look at the numbers, it's not, they're not the same. And so that's why I think in general, it's good to look at these different things, maybe to, try to inform our experience and maybe get a sense of where things are trending. But I always take all these things for a grain of salt, especially when it comes to the different narratives that are being driven online, because there's money to be made off of narratives, whether or not it's true or false. And I think we see people pandering, pushing certain ideas, or maybe trying to make them seem like they're more happening at a higher rate than they are, strictly just as a way to make money and as a way to feed into the algorithm.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree with you. Now I do think that, like the ratios are, we could probably look across generations and see, I find that a lot of my nieces and nephews who are much younger, they're more inclined to have more diverse dating options versus like, my sister, brother, and me.
Yeah.
We were a little bit more kind of towing the line. We may have stepped out here and there. Well, I think it started with me, but younger generations, they don't seem to care like so much.
They're right.
Yeah. So I do think, studies maybe 10, 20 years down the road, I think that those numbers that you cited earlier are going to change. I think they're going to tick up, because I just don't see the barriers there. I don't see the perception of there being barriers there among the younger generations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Last thing I wanted to add really quick, if I could, is that I echo some of the sentiments of the previous callers in terms of like efforts while at university. I went to PWI's undergrad and graduate school. And there were a lot of brothers, man, that were making efforts to try to get at sisters, and they just weren't feeling us like that, and so I wanted to insert into the conversation like ideas of masculinity, perceptions of masculinity. I think sisters are more inclined to kind of date that small minority of dudes, whether they be ball players or drug dealers or whatever the case may be, because maybe that's the example of what masculinity looks like that's what they were exposed to, versus the cats like us who was in the science lab, creative arts lab, engineering lab. They weren't really rocking with us like that,
Okay.
And we found it very, very difficult. Now, some of my friends, they went ahead and crossed that line, but a lot of us, we held out, and those were some very lonely years. So I would encourage sisters to really have a conversation with themselves about like what is my idea of masculinity, like where did it come from, and why do I gravitate towards the men that I do?
Yes. No, I think you really touched on something that I actually I am planning to address specifically that topic. And there's different studies, I think sociological studies, that have just positioned this in general, where it just tends to be that a large percentage of women go after a small minority of men. Generally, the men that are considered either, the most masculine, the most attractive, the most, however that culture considers high value. Right. And so that's pretty consistent across the board. I just think us Black women in general, we've been socialized in such a way, and encouraged in such a way to look after things that are not necessarily the healthiest. And I do think that does weigh into some of just the general experiences that we are having, and even just some of the issues we see today.
Right.
So
yeah, and it varies throughout the diaspora, because I noticed that, in college I tended to date more women from the continent and the Caribbean. Yeah. Who kind of valued, well, at least what I saw, right? Like they tended to value men who were in the library. They dated, the athletes and stuff like that too. But, when I did date Black women in undergrad and grad school, it tended to be women from other parts of the diaspora versus like Americanized or American born and raised women. Right. Yeah. So that, there's some diversity there in terms of ideas and stuff. But yeah, so I just wanted to contribute that to the conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me up.
Yeah. No, thank you for calling in.
All right, talk to you.
Yeah, so I think this has been really informative, really interesting